And welcome, everyone. This is the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and we've got a great show lined up for you all today. Joining me today, as always, for our set reviews is my good friend, Pongo. Pongo, how you doing today?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fine. And we're also joined by a very special guest. Cobblepot couldn't be with us for this episode like he always is, but we were able to get a Lab Maniac anyhow. So joining us for this Modern Horizons set review is going to be Lab Maniac Cameron. Cam, how's it going today?
It's going really well.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. It's honestly a pleasure. I know I've said this before to Cobblepot on the channel, but you guys are you guys are a huge part of why the Mind Sculptors even exist. I played almost every deck that you guys made, and so it's really awesome to get to work with you guys. So really appreciate it. As I said in the opening, we are going to be doing our Modern Horizons 2 set review today. But before we get into all of that, I just want to thank you for joining us this week. If you like this episode or any of our other episodes, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. If you want access to our Discord server as well as some extra content, make sure to head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/themindsculptors or check out the link in the description. So the first card that I want to talk about before I even get into anything is this is the chase card of the set. All right, guys, it's the best card. This card should be worth like $100 a pop, in my opinion. It's the best card in the set. There's none. It's so broken. For 2 colorless and 2 blue, you get a 6/6 with trample. That's amazing. Could you imagine? And the card, of course, that I'm talking about is Phantasmal Dreadmaw. I cannot believe that they printed this card. I think it's so funny because for such a long time they did all the memes with like the Phantasmal Dreadmaw memes where they did like red ones where it's like the same card or whatever. And they literally made the meme and they did a blue version of it and it just bounces to your hand or you sacrifice it. And I love that Wizards printed this so much. I think this is such a fun card.
Yeah, it seems a little sus as a Dreadmaw. I mean, anything pokes it and it just falls over, right?
Yeah, I suppose that's true. Like anything targets it, but come on. They acknowledged the meme, which I think is kind of hilarious.
I'm just glad that Wizards is printing the money cards at common these days.
Yeah, exactly. Printing the money cards where they matter. But moving right along. On to our next card is a card Charles wanted us to talk about, and I will make sure to talk about it. It is Out of Time. It's a enchantment that costs 1 colorless and 2 white. That says when Out of Time enters the battlefield, untap all creatures, then phase them out until Out of Time leaves the battlefield. Put a time counter on Out of Time for each creature phased out this way, and it has vanishing. So there's a lot going on with this, and it's like, you know, it has a lot of different interesting pieces that can go into this. But Cam, like, as far as like what could be a home for this, is this good? How do you feel about this card?
So when I first looked at it, I thought, hey, it's 3 CMC. This probably could go into Zur. And then you realize that it can also exile Zur as part of that.
Right.
Isn't so great. It does do some interesting things in that it phases the creatures out, which means they're not in graveyards. They're not in exile. They're essentially non-interactable. And what's nice about that portion is, I don't know if you've played Oubliette in casual EDH, but Oubliette is the single best piece of commander removal. So if you don't have a board already, and there are multiple decks that are commander dependent and their commanders are already deployed, this would be a good way of like, hey, there's a few extra mana dorks. Let's just remove all of the commanders for, 7 turns.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually looks relevant as a type of a board wipe, but that's pretty meta dependent. You need like several partners. You need to be expecting to see them in play. But if this actually does resolve, it's backbreaking. Like a Sakashima and Krark deck, where both Sakashima and Krark aren't going to be in play for 6 turns. Think about that.
I mean, how like a lot of games end before that, right? Like,
Yeah.
a lot of games go to like maybe 7 or 8 turns, and those are longer games. I mean that's like why I think it's like an intriguing card. I just like the problem I have with it, right, is the decks that want to play it or would be interested in a card like this wouldn't want to play it because there's so many times where you will not play it because your commander also gets phased out. And so
I would say the decks that would want to play this are non-green decks. If you have mana dorks, you don't want to play this. But there's a chance that like a Mardu deck might actually want to see this.
What are your thoughts, Pongo?
Yeah, I think realistically, probably you would be playing this in the type of deck that is looking to play its commander later down the line, such that this can theoretically come down before your commander comes down. You know, I just don't know that there's currently really all that many decks in the format that want this effect, at least as far as cEDH is concerned. You know, as far as other formats are concerned, you know, this is potentially a fantastic card, especially given how hard it is to remove enchantments. That being said, in other formats, you know, maybe there's only like 2 creatures out, so maybe the vanishing doesn't actually last that long.
Right.
So like, yeah, it's a really, really neat design. I kind of just struggle to find a place where I really want to play this in cEDH.
In Modern, this feels really interesting in blue-white control. Like, actually worth considering in blue-white control. Because of the fact that you can, like, especially you're going to struggle against decks that are going to play a bunch of creatures. And this certainly goes a long way in resetting that. And then you get to play it in multiples. And you're probably playing Teferi. And if you have this and Teferi out, you're probably going to be in a good spot. So I think this is interesting in Modern. But we're a cEDH podcast, right? So like it's interesting.
I have 2 thoughts. I think possibly like Kalia might like this, because most of the creatures in Kalia, they are either your primary win conditions, giant demons, or they're little hate bears that kind of slow everything down. And if you put a hate bear out and everybody else is putting out mana dorks, and then you get a commander or 2, and yeah, you'll lose your hate bear, but it's worth trading a hate bear for 2 commanders being gone for forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, oh crap, my mind just, and then I remember what I was going to say. And then Callahan, you've been trying to do like Cabal Therapy Academy Rector shenanigans for forever. How is this for a toolbox option in that?
That's interesting. That is actually very interesting. The thing that I run into though with that deck is like the way that it plays. If you're resolving the Rector, like really either Rector at this point, because I've ended up cutting Karn out of it, is that if you're resolving either Rector, you're attempting to win the game. And so like they end up being like your second and third Hulk pieces almost, or your second and third Hulks. And so in like maybe not Rector fit, it would make more sense. Like the deck that I'm working on right now, I don't think it fits into that deck, because that deck is just like a very good comparison is like Snacks has made this comparison a lot, is it plays very similarly to how like Shuffle Hulk played. And so in that, I don't think it's great. If I was playing a more mid-rangey toolbox Rector deck, I could certainly consider this for sure. And you could make an argument that in Rector Fit in Legacy, it would be very interested in this card as one of its toolbox options.
Yeah, definitely. I could agree with that.
Also, looking at more enchantment pieces is Dress Down, which is a colorless and a blue enchantment with flash. It says when Dress Down enters the battlefield, draw a card. Creatures lose all abilities. At the beginning of the end step, sacrifice Dress Down. So obviously this is going to remind a lot of people of humility. Notably, though, it doesn't change power toughness. So Pongo, what are your thoughts on this kind of blue humility?
I think this is a pretty interesting card. So the first thing that comes to mind when I see it is using it particularly in like very proactive, sort of like aggressive, probably ad nause Underworld Breach style decks that don't really need to have any particular creature in play to win. Right. Being able to use Thassa's Oracle is nice in those decks, but it's not a requirement for them to win when they're going off. And then you can use this as just like a hyper efficient board wipe to take care of like a ton of like hate bears all in one shot. Draw a card at the same time because why not? It's a blue card, which is not irrelevant. Doesn't hurt you in terms of your life total. And if you're in a matchup where it's not super relevant, you just cycle it away. So like you can kind of just consider running it main board for those situations without necessarily feeling too bad if you made kind of a wrong call and don't necessarily need that utility. But like additionally, you can also just use it as like a pseudo counter spell. Even in those matchups where it might not necessarily be incredible. If you're playing against like a lot of other turbo ad nauseum style decks, you can use it to like counter a Dockside Extortionist or their Thassa's Oracle. So that's like added value that a sorcery speed board wipe wouldn't give you. And those decks tend to like tech into board wipes, for more open metas, when they're not necessarily sure what they're going to need as far as toolboxes options are concerned, or as far as, reactive options to deal with, like a particularly hateful pod. But, this is the type of thing that ends up feeling a lot more flexible and efficient and could theoretically take that spot.
Yeah, I had looked at this more from the reactive perspective. And as a counterspell to a creature on the stack, like it definitely does shut off the ETBs. It doesn't necessarily work as well if you're responding to like a Neoform or an Eldritch Evolution or a Protean Hulk, because you have to telegraph it. You have to put it into play before the trigger resolves. So they'll get information regarding having Dress Down in play and know that, hey, any creature you get are going to have no abilities. So you're not going to get that Thassa's Oracle trigger, and they'll just get something else. And it doesn't really get them that way. But I hadn't thought about it in that proactive perspective where you could actually in the end step cast this before your turn, and then you have a turn with 0 hate bears in effect. That is really nice. I like that a lot.
I hadn't thought about it in that ability, but it does shut off like Draneth. It shuts off like a lot. Like it shuts off a lot of stuff. That's actually really interesting. I know I've already brought up Lavinia, but I do have to make my obligatory. This will probably play this in Lavinia mention. Because this is certainly an interesting card, especially as we're dropping Knowledge Pool. This becomes way more interesting.
I also like this in like Niv Mizzet or any curiosity-based deck, because it is not only is it like a counter to a Thassa's Oracle, but it also shuts off Hull Breacher.
Yeah.
Downside is it does also shut off Niv Mizzet, but you'd be able to actually like throw out a wheel at that point to kind of get yourself back in the game.
The one maybe this is downside, maybe it's an upside. Haven't really figured it out yet. Is not hitting the power toughness is like actually a real thing. Because, a lot of humility decks that are wanting to do humility-like things usually want to abuse it with, and maybe I'm just evaluating this incorrectly, but like are wanting to do stuff with Elish Norn or stuff that, screw with power toughness. So it's kind of interesting that it doesn't do that. So it's weird to look at this in a... It's hard for me to evaluate this card because I think that it certainly has applications, but like not in the context that I feel like I would immediately think. Like I didn't even think about what Pongo was saying, but that makes a lot of sense. And I think my initial reading of it was so like, oh, this is humility, that it's kind of skewed how I was looking at it.
Yeah, I was in that same boat for sure.
Another card that I'm really excited about that's coming out soon is with the set is Suspend. It's a 1 blue mana instant that says exile target creature and put 2 time counters on it. If it doesn't have Suspend, it gains Suspend. So it's kind of this combination of delay and of Swords to Plowshares, but in blue. And I'm really excited about this card. I call this Swords to Plowshares 2 Electric Boogaloo. Cam, what are your thoughts on this card?
I really like it. The fact that it exiles the creature really gets it away from Kenrith decks that are just wanting to reanimate a Hate Bear again and again and again. This will give you at least 2 turns to then kind of get back into the game and get past that annoying card. I'm definitely going to be running it. I see this probably replacing like a Rapid Hybridization or a Pongify in most decks that are running those.
Yeah.
Pongo?
I don't know. Callahan, did you have something you wanted to add?
I mean, I was about to ask you exactly what you thought.
Okay. I think it's a nice removal option for, especially for low color decks.
Yeah.
Will it replace something like Pongify Rapid Hybridization in all contexts? That's a good question. I'm not sure that, for example, for a lot of slower decks, you're necessarily going to be happy to have the card come back in 2 turns. Obviously, there's the trade-off with potential reanimation style stuff, but at least at that point, you're kind of limiting them to like being on Kenrith and having Kenrith in play. Potential like 10 mana play of reanimating whatever card you destroyed. Certain decks obviously don't want to have to deal with the 3/3 that Pongify Rapid Hybridization leave behind, so that's obviously relevant. But I don't know that it's relevant enough for the decks that are actually playing Pongify and Rapid Hybridization these days. And then for higher color decks, well, a lot of them, like I was saying earlier, aren't even running Swords to Plowshares these days, and I think that would...
Which is incorrect!
I think that would come in before this does, for those decks that aren't on it, and theoretically, you could be looking at more options as well. I think, a lot of those decks tend to prefer to play bounce spells, for example, if they're on Dockside Extortionist, for instance. So it's contextual. I think that this is certainly a card that's going to see play in cEDH. And I think that it's just kind of awkward that a lot of the decks that would want to play it are slower decks, and it is kind of like delay in the sense that like the card does come back and 2 turns is less than 3 turns. So and beyond that, actually 2 turns is a lot less than 3 turns if you have to use this like on somebody else's turn, and then like it goes to their turn, that's immediately 1 time counter off, and then 1 more round turn around the table, and it's just back into play. So obviously you want to be using this on their turn ideally, to sort of like stretch out that effect as long as possible, which is doable. Obviously it's an instant, but can be awkward at times.
I think one thing, I don't know, I'm sure mono blue decks will consider this, but I think in blue decks that are, so I see this specifically in like Azorius and like Azorius X decks being a consideration, because you'll have Draneth that you will more than likely be running. And if you're me, you play also Lavinia and 3 Fairy. So when you have all those pieces, then this card becomes permanent removal.
Yeah.
Which is where it becomes amplified. Like it becomes literally just a really good card.
It's certainly a slam dunk for a commander I will not be naming right now.
I think you all can like, if for the people in our Discord, when this card was spoiled, I think I got like 100 pings or something across all the Discords, our Discord and Twitter, of just like, Callahan, Lavinia, and I was just like, yeah, I know, I'm excited.
So outside of Lavinia, I'm curious if this would see play in Cody as a 1-drop that would remove Cody from play.
I don't see why not. I mean, it boils down to whether or not in 5 colors you don't just have a better card for the slot.
I hate that deck exists.
But assuming that this is kind of like the next best one on the list of 1-drops that you want to play, certainly an option. Yeah, removes Cody. It's interaction. It's efficient. It can also just kind of be played as your 1-drop to get the Cody thing rolling.
Yeah, it feels better if Chain of Vapor there at least, because then you aren't running the risk of your Cody like getting bounced back to you. You can just kind of use it to be the spot removal for when you're trying to go off, which is really nice. Because especially if you're playing like specifically the build, not Lyndon's build, but Sick Robot's build, where you're only playing Profane Tutor, like this ends up being like exactly enough to go get like protection and gets your win con, which is pretty good. I don't know.
And removes Cody from play, which is an important part of that deck.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it will see more play in the proactive decks that just need to get rid of a hate bear for a bit.
Yeah.
I think definitely we'll see play in Cody. But I do agree that the slower decks running Pongo Fire or Rapid Hybridization probably will stay on those.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, a lot of those decks are they just want additional removal anyway. So theoretically, if you're in blue-green, this could be like the third piece of removal you run to deal with like Hull Breacher and Opposition Agent and all that fun stuff.
Yeah. Next card on our list is Damn. I'm not cursing. I am just reading a word off of a card. It is 2 black, a sorcery. It says destroy target creature. A creature destroyed this way can't be regenerated. Also has Overload, which is 2 colorless and 2 white. And I'm really into this card. Cam, what is your thoughts on this bad boy?
So discounted sorcery speed murder or Wrath of God, this is amazing. And if you can run it, you probably want to. The modal side of it is just incredible. You've got a board wipe or you've got spot removal, your choice. It does have the issue of trying to find a spot. And kind of the question is do you run it over probably Toxic Deluge is where I'm thinking the best spot for it is. Now, Toxic Deluge also has the ability to be somewhat modal where you can, if you're running Crom, you can pay 3 life and keep your Crom around. This doesn't give you that option. So it's kind of iffy there, but it's an amazing card. I know I'm going to be running it in several decks. Pongo, what about you?
Yeah, so I agree with your assessment overall. I'm not sure yet, sort of like where this stacks up to Toxic Deluge, as you said. And as a result, I'm not 100% sure, depending on sort of what side of Toxic Deluge it falls on, how much play it's going to see. If people are kind of like hedging, they're playing like a sort of more like creature heavy strategy, but they still want to be playing a sweeper, then perhaps they pick this over Toxic Deluge because if you're behind on board, you have access to a board wipe modally. But if you're like ahead on board and you don't necessarily want to wipe the board to deal with something problematic, then you have the potential to just remove one thing. But I would, I think in theory, sort of more controlling decks, especially, if they're like in kind of like heavy color identity, like 4 colors, where they might not be leaning too heavily on white mana, might prefer to play Toxic Deluge. It's hard for me to say at this point because Toxic Deluge has other downsides, right? Like where, for example, you have to pay life, and that can be very relevant for those types of decks as well. I kind of have to see how this card plays out a little bit more before I can say for sure. Theoretically replaces Toxic Deluge on the high end, and on the low end, doesn't really see much play because people prefer to play something like Toxic Deluge, or a Rushing River type effect, or they're just going to lean on their Cyclonic Rifts. And obviously there's some decks that are going to be happy to play multiple board wipes, and this will probably see some play in those. So great card. I'm not 100% sure about it yet.
I'm just sad I can't play it in Lavinia. That's all I have to say about it.
I think the Toxic Deluge line might be if you're normally spending 4 or more on Deluge, Dam is probably going to be a better choice for you. That's kind of the break-even point for me. Maybe it's 5. So if you're like trying to kill a Kenrith or a Gitrog or a Niv Mizzet, and those are the things you're normally clearing with a Toxic Deluge, then Dam might just be better for you in the long run. And that's kind of something that it might be much more meta dependent than Toxic Deluge is right now. And that might be what really happens.
Yeah, that's fair.
All I have to say is for everybody who makes the stupid, but it's a child's card game. We literally have like now multiple cards that have like curse words on them. Like, guys, this is meant for adults, okay? Like, dial it back.
I mean, like, can't you play a game where you plow your mom? That's already in Magic.
Every time I hear that argument, whenever somebody says that, I'm just like, it's not meant for kids. It's not even closely marketed at kids. Like, it drives me up a wall, but that's neither here nor there. Like, but on to our next portion of the show, and I'm going to kind of announce them all together because we're kind of going to talk about them like collectively, because I feel like it's at least mentioning all of them, is the Suspend cycle of cards that they printed. And the black one we'll talk about specifically last because there's just a lot to talk about with this. So there's the white one, which is Suspend 2, one in a colorless, or one colorless and a white. That is Resurgent Belief, and it is replenish on a card or on a Suspend sorcery. Return all enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. The green one is Gaia's Will. It's Suspend 4 for 1 green, and it's Yawgmoth's Will. Until end of turn, you may play lands and cast spells from your graveyard. If a card would be put into your graveyard from anywhere this turn, exile that card instead. The red one's Glimpse of Tomorrow, which is Suspend 3. And that's for 2 red, and it reads shuffle all permanents you own into your library, then reveal that many cards from the top of your library, then put all non-aura permanent cards revealed this way onto the battlefield, then do the same for aura cards, then put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. The blue one is Inevitable Betrayal, I can talk, which has Suspend 3, that costs 1 colorless and 2 blue. Search target opponent's library for a creature card and put that card onto the battlefield under your control. Then that player shuffles. And the last one is the black one, which is Profane Tutor, which has Suspend 2 that costs 1 colorless and black. Search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle. So there's a cycle of these cards that they printed. And So Pongo, we'll talk about Profane Tutor here in a second because there's a lot to talk about with that. Ian's released a video about that. If you haven't watched it, go watch it. But there's a lot of going on with this cycle of cards. What are your thoughts on them? Which ones do you think are going to, like, the Profane Tutor's obviously busted, but the other ones, like, where do we fall on them? What do we think?
Yeah, Profane Tutor, I won't get too much into it. You know, busted kind of in specific contexts. So card is fine by my estimation. After that, we have kind of a steep drop off, in my opinion. You know, the blue one is essentially bribery. Suspend 3 is kind of a long time, but obviously some decks are just going to ignore that, you know, altogether, at which point this kind of becomes a free bribery. And that's pretty interesting, but I'm not necessarily sure that's going to be good enough for, you know, the type of decks that can that see play in cEDH and that can kind of regularly pull off that type of thing. You know, like Yidris comes to mind, and you know, while in theory you have this Yidris line where you can bribery somebody's Thassa's Oracle and then cast a demonic consultation, you know, I have doubts that Yidris really wants to be playing the kind of like spin the wheel Yidris plan anyway, as opposed to just kind of doing more like turbo things. With Yidris as kind of just an enabler who's not 100% required, but like when he's in play, you know, you kind of just get there, and then you maybe play a few of like the super powerful Yidris payoffs. Glimpse of Tomorrow, I don't think really does enough that we care about in cEDH, so I'm not going to get...
Oh, the card is so fun, though.
I mean, it's a 2-mana Warp World, right? Like, that's...
Yeah.
But it's only personal Warp World. It doesn't affect the whole board.
It's just so
and that makes it just like...
I think it's so fun.
Unplayable.
It's
absolutely.
It's so fun. 100%
absolutely.
fun. 100% fun. 100%
It's fun, but it's...
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think it's relevant for us, really. And then I kind of feel somewhat similarly... Well, no, I feel similar for the next two. I kind of feel similar to the blue one, to the bribery one, where it's like they're pretty interesting, pretty powerful. I could see world and I could see decks where in theory you could play them, but I'm not sure that, you know, like it's worth jumping through hoops to get them to do their thing. You know, Gaia's Will, like probably it's just better to play like some of the other the better and the better things that you're going to hit off of your cascades, and then Resurgent Belief, very interesting card, like super excited that this exists. It's going to see play, you know, somewhere, but I'm, you know, if Replenish is not really seeing play to begin with, I don't think that this is like an improvement over Replenish necessarily, so I just don't see it for cEDH at the current time. Maybe at some point in the future, if we get like some kind of really powerful enchantment-based combo that's easy to enable or easy enough to enable, but not right now.
Yeah.
So, if I can step in here, I agree on Inevitable Betrayal. There definitely are going to be decks that are just going to be able to suspend it for 3 and not care. The Yidris line is hilarious, but Yidris really shouldn't be on the Yidris spin to win. It's just too slow right now. But this could be done off of a Rashmi pretty easily.
Ooh.
And I could totally see Rashmi just suspending this anyways.
Woo, that's hot.
But like, how many good things is there to steal, right? Like
I don't know, just stealing somebody's Thor is like good.
Well, no, not
like
if you can't combo with it.
Stealing a Dockside, stealing a Hull
Like,
Breacher.
is Rashmi interested?
Voidwalker.
Yeah. Is Rashmi interested in bribery? Like, not at all. I don't think.
Bribery that you can get off of a Brainstorm, yes. Bribery that you have to pay 5 mana for, no.
Oh, because Rashmi
like
can cast this card off of the deck.
Yeah,
that's okay. That's a different story.
Yeah, that's the thing. So Gaia's Will and Bribery are both kind of in that weird spot where Rashmi could theoretically play these. And that's, I think, the only deck where these have a real chance of seeing play. Because you just get to skip the suspend entirely very easily based off of a commander and your normal play patterns. So I
but how
definitely
much does Rashmi really want a Yawgmoth's Will?
That's where I'm not 100% sure. But
because Yawgmoth's Will is
it's
a very
kind of
like
on the weird
proactive
spot.
card, right?
Yeah.
And like Rashmi
Gaia's
is a
Will's
very
definitely on the edge.
Yeah.
100%.
Like,
the bribery, I would love to play that bribery.
Yeah, that's hot.
Yeah, that's neat.
I
can see
hadn't
it.
even considered that. That seems worth. Gaia's Will, I don't know, because like you're already kind of playing a Drago strategy, and so Gaia's Will being a card that is going to, when you cast it, be a proactive spell feels like there's a tension there.
At the same time with Rashmi, like over 40% of your deck is instant speed.
Yeah.
So if you do hit this on somebody else's turn, you now have access to your graveyard of
Oh, does it let you break timing restrictions?
No, but your graveyard's mostly instant speed spells anyways. Rashmi does. Rashmi lets you cast it as you resolve the Rashmi trigger.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, never
So-
mind. Yeah, that's actually actually intriguing. Never mind. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so that's the whole thing, is that you cast it as part of resolving the Rashmi trigger, so you would get
Right.
Gaia's Will resolving on somebody else's turn, and it would give you access to additional interaction in
Right.
your bin.
Okay, that's
That's the
fair.
part
That's
that's
interesting.
nice,
Okay.
Yeah, and the same thing with like briberying out somebody's creature or somebody's target for like a Finale of Devastation or a Protean Hulk. As your response, you're like, hey, I don't have a counterspell, but I have a cantrip. Oh, hey, look at that. I'm just gonna go steal your Thoracle. I don't care that I'm not gonna win off of it, but you're not gonna win.
Yeah. No,
And that's
actually-
basically
pretty hot.
Rashmi's game plan. And Resurgent Belief, although we don't see replenish right now, I think Suspend 2 for 1 and a white is very castable and very suspendable. And there's not a deck right now, but I would really like to see like a self-mill that just dumps out
Yeah.
a ton of reanimate, like dumps out a Necromancy and an Animate Dead on a Razaketh and a Leonin Relic Warder, and you just win off of that.
Yeah, this card is legitimately like quite good, but just not relevant enough.
We don't have a current home. It would need a new deck to be built around it.
I have thoughts, but nothing that is like actually good. I just have like meme thoughts where I was like, what if I build the replenish deck? But
So outside of memes, what are your thoughts on Profane Tutor?
God, this card is good. And it's good in like specifically like one context, right? Is it makes Cody. So people were playing Cody and like it was good. It was like whatever, but it was like almost a meme to some extent because like, why are you playing Cody versus some of these other 5-color decks that are a little bit stronger and lets you play like creatures and all these sorts of things? And Cody makes that just not a problem now with Profane Tutor because like it makes literally if there's anything that's stopping you from winning, I think we talked about this earlier, is like any removal spell that you have can help you go off and hit your Profane Tutor. And the fact that it's not a cascade, you can wait to cast it. It just like it's like the perfect storm of things, right? That make this so really good in this shell. I have no idea where else I want to play this. Like maybe Idris, but do I really want to wheel into a tutor? Like, I guess that's good, but I don't know. Anyhow, like in Cody, this is like bananas good and makes Cody like the best Turbo Nas deck.
That's
by a mile.
debatable.
So for people who are not familiar with Cody, what happens is you mulligan to a hand to try to get a turn 1 or 2 Cody in play, followed by a turn 2 or 3 Cody activation into casting a 1-drop spell. This will then cascade you into Profane Tutor, and you'll have 4 mana from the rest of the Cody activation to then just need to add 1 more, and you get to cast Ad Nauseam immediately, which is, I mean, the deck is mostly called Tutors for Nas, and it makes a turbo Ad Nauseam deck which we used to really have with Sidisi Brood Tyrant. Oh, no, Sidisi Undead
Yeah, the
Vizier,
black one.
which was just mono black Nas, except this lets you run
5
blue
colors.
spells and green spells, and is just incredibly fast and consistent based off the fact that you have 31 drops that all turn into Demonic Tutor.
Let me clarify, by the way, Pongo, because I agree with your that's debatable. I think this is better than Rog Silas, in my opinion. I think this is like a little bit better than Rog Silas because of the fact that it can recover. Whereas like Rog Silas, if you disrupt it and you like make the thing stop, it just can't recover, and then they're out of the game.
Well, I don't know that
Whereas
this
like
is necessarily much better. Like,
yeah, but you're playing 5 color and you play like better quality cards overall. Like you don't have like the deck's card quality is like so much higher than Rog Silas's is overall.
I don't know if that's even necessarily true. Like Rog Silas is playing more payoffs because it's not like if we are talking specifically, for example, about like some of like the current Cody builds, who knows where this deck ends up in the future, but
Right.
Like Rog Silas plays more wheels for recovery. It plays like Bolus's Citadel as like an extra payoff, Peer into the Abyss as extra payoffs. So it's more like payoff dense. So if there is disruption on your first win attempt and you like can't protect it or something like that, you're theoretically like top decking better cards compared to like one drop, like sacrifice Cody effects and like twiddles if that's what you're doing or just additional interaction. So I'm not sure yet like that it's necessarily more resilient or like faster or anything like that. I think it's more consistent. Like I think that you don't have to mulligan as much with this deck because your whole plan is in the command zone for the most part. So you just kind of need to be able to cast Cody on turn 1, latest turn 2, so that you can do the thing like on turn 3. You could try to do the thing on turn 2, but most of the time, and from what I've read, people are suggesting that this is like a turn 3 deck with protection, which is like a great place to be. Don't get me wrong, but Rog Silas, for example, is going to be more of like a turn 2 deck. Sometimes with protection, sometimes with the only protection being, hopefully no one has Force of Will, or like they all tapped out to play their Mana Dork. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a good deck. It's going to be obviously like 5 color Nas kind of has, it can only be so bad. And it certainly has its own, quote unquote gimmick that I think is going to make it, that makes a compelling argument for playing it over other options. But is it like, a tier 0 deck? Is it? No. Is it necessarily better than all the other Turbo Nas decks? Well, I don't necessarily think so because you don't have like grind potential that a lot of those other decks have. Yeah, I think it's another option. It's one of the better options in 5 colors for Turbo Nas. And
it definitely de-seats like Golos.
Well,
like,
I mean,
like
some people would probably still disagree with that, but I would tend to.
I mean,
agree,
like,
but
there are going to be people who are still going to play it, and like it's still like I'm not saying it's bad or that it's objectively better, but it feels a little bit faster and it feels a little bit more consistent. And I think that's kind of where I land on it. But I think like all of that to say that like this one card is what made Cody relevant.
Right.
Like
it's a big improvement.
Like,
this is a deck defining card.
It's a big improvement over the old ones.
Kind of to add some discussion, do you see this playable outside of Cody? I think Suspend 2 is reasonable. I think it has a possibility to see play, but I'm really hesitant to say yeah.
Not with Janice floating
I think,
around.
like for a casual EDH, this is basically Demonic Tutor.
Oh, yeah.
Like this is incredible.
Oh yeah, 100% for casual.
Yeah.
100%. With Janice, I agree that would stop me from wanting to play this.
I just feel like it's a hard sell outside of Cody and cEDH.
It's so
Like-
slow. It's like compare this to Wishclaw Talisman. You can imagine Wishclaw
Yeah.
Talisman has Suspend 1. And that's fine. But Suspend 2 is like that is a lot.
Yeah, good point. That's a really good comparison. And yeah, you'd probably be pulling out Wishclaw in order to put this in. I like Wishclaw more than this.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the cycle of cards. I think they're really fun. I think they're intriguing. I know that Whimsy and I are doing some like as foretold things. Whether or not it like pans out in the long run, probably not. But it's at least stuff that we're like exploring because these new cards seem worth exploring, which is exciting to have new stuff to kind of dig through. Next card on our list is a card that not Cameron, our boy Pongo is very excited about. If you are in our Discord server, you would know that Pongo has changed his name in the server to this card, which is Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. It is a 1-red legendary creature monkey pirate. That is a 2/1 that has dash for 1 colorless and a red. And it says whenever Ragavan deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token, and I can't believe there's an and to this card. I just putting that out there. And exile the top card of that player's library. Until end of turn, you may cast that card. What the heck? So this card's going for a lot of money right now on the secondary market for pre-orders. They're going for like 80, 90 bucks right now. It's wild.
Right now, the only people that have them on TCG have them at 90 bucks, but the market's at like 40 to 50s.
Wow.
I mean, this is Red's Birds of Paradise, and it has an upside, and it has pseudo haste with dash to get around board wipes later.
Dude, this in burn is insane. Like,
also-
thinking about modern purely for a moment, like this in modern burn is gross. Like,
Well, it doesn't have haste, but
yeah.
I could still see it.
I mean, think about this like in modern, you're looking at 3 fairy. This gets around that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, let me dash this out and kill the Teferi. The dash is incredibly strong.
yeah.
And I pretty much see almost every deck wanting to run this because it is essentially a Birds of Paradise.
I don't like. So remember Pongo when you were saying with Esper Sentinel, you don't like comparing it to Mystic Remora? Mm-hmm. That's how I feel about Ragavan. Mm-hmm. I don't like comparing it to Birds of Paradise. And the reason is it's, I think a better way of comparing it would actually be Gilded Goose if you're going to compare it to a Manadork. Because you do have to, like, it is contextual. So it does have to connect. And so, like, you can't on your main phase get the treasure. You have to go to combat. It has to deal damage. And if your board is yucked up, then you're not getting any value off of it. Now, most of the time, you're probably going to be able to get this thing through. Like, it's a pretty decent body on a 2/1 for a 1. But I do think there is some it is extraordinarily good. It's insanely good. And it kind of helps contribute to the turn 2 Najeela package, which is bananas. But, and I could actually see a world where in up against Najeela decks, like, people consider blocking with their dorks, against this card.
I don't think anybody ever does that. I think it's too much of a setback for yourself against like one other player to do that. Go down a card and a mana and a mana, just to keep one person off of their turn 2 Najeela. Like, yeah,
but then you're also going down your top deck and then somebody's also ramping and your top deck.
But you
could if I just Imperial sealed, I'm absolutely blocking this thing.
Sure. But you don't have to attack the person who just Imperial sealed, right? Like,
it's true.
If you're concerned about that. And if we're talking about turn 1, like it's not incredibly common that people go Mana Dork and Imperial Seal in the same turn. Like, it obviously happens,
Sure.
but, you know, most of the time you'll see either one or the other. So I expect him to get through, especially on turn 2. You know, later on, obviously, like, there's a potential that he gets blocked, but, like, that's less... it's less crucial that he connects later on in a lot of situations,
Right.
because your mana will already have been developed at that point, especially Najeela. Like, Najeela will already be in play. You know, notably, it doesn't cast like one of your win conditions, like off the treasure, in your main phase before combat. So like, that's notable downside. But you know, it is a mana dork that also generates value. So you know, you'll take your wins where you can get them, I think.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, it has some upside where you can kind of just sit on some treasures, and like kind of just stockpile mana that like other mana dorks don't really let you do. You know, they don't let you bank mana across turns. And so like that can be major upside as well. So yeah, like this card has a ton of promise. Like, it's a lot of text for a 1-drop. And usually when you see that, you know, you need to at least try the card out. We'll put it that way. I'm incredibly excited about it, as we know. I'm not sure that it's going to see play in like every like Turbo Nas, like red deck, you know, like, you know, even something like, for example, like a Godo might not necessarily want it. It might be a little too slow for that type of context, but something like Najeela, where you're kind of looking for like more steady value, more consistency, and, you know, like a more consistent but slightly slower win with protection. This is hot. And
Yeah.
it contributes 2 mana onto Revi lines because it attacks and makes a treasure, which other mana dorks don't do. So this on turn 1 into turn 2 Najeela can lead to a Derevi win on turn 3. If you have like 1 piece of fast mana, I think is the math, is pretty sick.
Looking at a really cool card, there's like not a ton to say about this other than just this is a solid design and we need to complete the cycle. But it's Ignoble Hierarch. And if you're wondering what this is, it's literally just Noble Hierarch, but for Jund. It's 1 green creature, Goblin Shaman that's a 0/1 that has Exalted, and it taps, so instead of making Bant, it makes Jund. So there's a lot of really obviously people are really excited about this because anytime we get like good 1 mana dorks, like people like get really excited because they don't come around all that often. And so like, Cam, what are people, what's the kind of feeling out there? What are we thinking about this?
So if you can run this pretty much replaces any of your green tap for green dorks.
Yep.
Llanowar Elves, Fintorn Elves, Elvish Mystic. If you're in a deck that is not running any of those, but you have like Arbor Elf and Elves of Deep Shadow, my guess is you replace Elves of Deep Shadow here, but you need to be replacing a Llanowar Elf or similar first.
Yeah. 100%. I think I've been yelling about that in Discord servers because I keep seeing people in like their 4-color decks going, I'm going to cut Elves of Deep Shadow. I was like, no, cut your Llanowar Elves or cut your Finhorn Elves or cut your Elvish Mystic. Like, you don't need 3 mono green dorks and only 1, like it, you're going to want black. So it's like, just play this and Elves of Deep Shadow and like a green dork if you have to play one.
Yeah, I mean, you can already make green mana if you
power-
can cast a green dork.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. The power behind Elves of Deep Shadow is it turns your green mana into future black mana
Yes.
rather than more green mana, so that you can keep casting your black spells later.
Yeah. Like
Solid card.
I keep seeing a bunch of people on Twitter too being like, this is going to replace Elves of Deep Shadow in my cube. And I'm like, what? Why? Just cut. I don't know. Obviously,
I could see
it's a
that in
different
Cube,
discussion,
yeah.
but
because in Cube, like if you're playing mana dorks, you're probably playing the green deck, right? And so like this is definitely like, even like Noble Hierarch is like, it's good, but it's not as much of an upgrade in Cube over like a Finhorn Elves or whatever, as it is for us, for example.
yeah.
because you're probably looking to do like natural order shenanigans, and that's why you're taking a bunch of mana dorks. I mean, it depends on the cube. I'm thinking more for like vintage cube, but yeah, you're kind of just looking for acceleration, and like life loss can be more relevant. Elves of Deep Shadow is kind of only a major upside in cube if you're specifically building green black.
Right, that makes sense. Anyhow, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, neither here nor there.
Yeah, we're not a cube podcast.
Good card is very good, and I am happy to have 2 Exalted Dorks in Najeela.
I'm also interested in seeing people swing with Tymna for 3.
Wait. Oh, I guess you play this in Tymna Tana, don't you?
Tymna Tana finally gets their own Noble Hierarch.
About damn time. Yep. Now we just need them for Teamer, for Sultai, and for Naya, and then everything will be good. Man, a Sultai Hierarch would be real good.
I don't.
Holy crap.
I wouldn't hold my breath for that personally.
Maybe don't do that.
I can only get so erect.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I guess the next card on our list is Moderation.
It's a trap. That's all there is to say about it.
It's a trap.
Don't play this card.
Do not play this card. Oh my gosh, the amount of messages I got of people who are like, are you going to play this in Lavinia? And I'm like, I already don't play Rule of Laws. Why would I want a one-sided Rule of Law? Like, I just don't play the card. It's so bad.
Yeah. Even in the Rule of Law decks, like, you're going to have to cast this instead of your 1 spell per turn, which means that you're taking like an entire turn off just to develop this, and then you can draw a card off of each card you draw from that point on. But you're doing a lot of stuff at sorcery speed in those decks. What is this card really looking for? It's looking for like an instant speed Rule of Law control deck for it to be played in, and that doesn't really exist currently
in any form.
Yeah.
In all honesty, that's something that Cobble has tried to put together like for years, but he's still like trying to make it work.
Right.
And it's not
exactly.
there yet.
We're not there yet, but that's what it will take to make this card playable.
This card
and it should have been 2 mana, but at like most.
This card kind of I don't want to stick on this too long because it's really dumb and it's a bad card. Makes me think of, there's the Ristic Studies video, and Spicy 8-Rack also did a video talking about like cards that are like intentionally bad. And it's like meant to kind of train new players into knowing like what's good, what's not, and kind of giving people like that sort of contextualization for like what's worth the payoff. And that this seems to be like a 1 for nothing or type of card, or 1 with nothing type of card, that it's like intentionally bad, and people are going, like, good players are going to try and find a way to exploit it, and it's going to, like, new players are going to see this and be like, oh, I can't draw a card off of every card I spent, and then they're going to figure out like the restrictions of that. But yes, don't play this card. It's a bad card. It's a trap. Don't play it. Don't play it in Lavinia. Don't play Rule of Laws in Lavinia. And okay, I'm done.
All right.
Our next card on a list is a card that I also got a lot of messages about. Lots of, oh my God, is Void Mirror. It's a 2 colorless artifact that says whenever a player casts a spell, if no colored mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. Obviously, I have opinions about this. But Pongo, how are you feeling about this card?
I mean, I think it's like kind of like Lavinia for every deck. And so if you're interested in that effect and you're not in blue-white, or you want a second Lavinia, then like maybe you play this. For the decks that I play, for example, like Rule of Law Kenrith, King K Rule, as much as like it's nice to have Lavinia, to be able to do the Possibility Storm combo with it. Lavinia does do more than this. Notably, it has like a whole other ability that's incredibly relevant in the current meta. And additionally, I don't know that I actually want like redundancy for this particular part of Lavinia. So I'm like not actually interested in this stacks piece for any of the decks that I play. But obviously there are decks that can't play Lavinia, or are not in 5 colors, and so maybe have like less access to a wide variety of cards. Maybe they're interested in this. I think what we kind of see is that like every Magic set brings like a 2-mana stacks piece, like minor stacks piece with it, and like the cEDH community kind of goes crazy, being like, does this finally make stacks viable, or like does this break stacks? And every time it's like, well, no, like
Nope.
like maybe it sees like some amount of play, but it's not actually like that insane.
So the big downside is that Lavinia is one-sided.
Yes.
This isn't.
Another
you.
So if you're
consideration.
If you're running Lavinia, you never want to run Void
Don't
Mirror,
play
because
this
then
card
you're just
in
putting
Lavinia.
yourself in this.
God,
Yes.
I don't know how many times I have to have this conversation with people in that Discord. They're like, oh my God, are we playing this? And even Phoenix was like, oh man, we're going to play this as an auto include. And I'm like, guys, we don't play rule of laws because we can't break parity on them, right? It's the whole reason that
Yeah.
we're not a low colored, like similar to King K rule deck. The whole reason that King K rule can go out and be like Lavinia Possibility Storm is because you have Kenrith in the command zone to break parity on that. Lavinia cannot break parity. That's why the deck runs Sun Titan. That's why the deck runs Consecrated Sphinx, Teferi, all these other things, because your commander is part of that lock. And you have to run all these supplemental pieces to kind of make up for that. Do not play a one-sided effect that you cannot break parity on. If you're in a deck where you can break parity on this and you have, big creatures in the command zone, if you have a Crom, and you're not in like blue-white somehow and you want to play this effect.
If you have a
Go for
Kamal,
it. That's
for
fine.
example.
Yeah, like if you're playing
Yeah.
like this is fine there. But for the love of God, please don't play this in Lavinia. It's
Also,
go ahead, Kim.
also of note, if you do any other taxing effects,
Yeah.
like Thalia or Thorn of Amethyst, it makes all of the free spells now cost mana,
Yeah.
and then they can feed colored mana into it and entirely nullify Void Mirror. So it just doesn't work with the other taxing effects that you would normally run in most stacks.
A whole new generation of
decks.
players finally gets to learn why Lavinia doesn't play taxing effects.
God, it's like every time somebody messages me, they're like, hey, Cal, will you check out this Lavinia deck? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And I look at it and there's like Glorybringer, or not Glorybringer, Glory Rider and Thalia and Sphere. And I'm like, guys, this isn't Grand Arbiter. Like, I understand, like, I understand why people do it because like it feels like it should do that. And like, but like, there's a lot of things with Lavinia that are very like counterintuitive. So it's why I don't recommend Lavinia to a lot of people, because you have to be like really into it and you have to like devote a lot of time to learning how to play that deck to play it well. And even then there's going to be times where you're just like, sucks to suck. Like I don't have it. And it's just kind of the reality of playing in 2 colors. But, one thing I have to say before we move on is I heard Pongo say some very nice things about Lavinia in this segment. And I just want to remind you, Pongo, I now have you on record for saying nice things about my favorite Magic card. So
I mean, it's a good card in other decks.
I have you on record. Give me a win, okay? Oh man. Moving on. There is some new lands that are going to be coming out. And this one is Yavimaya. Wow, I cannot talk. Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, which is a legendary land that says each land is a forest in addition to its other card types. This is quite literally green Urborg. It's quite literally that. So, Cam, when we're looking at this card and we're talking about kind of the decks that are going to be interested in this, what are we thinking about?
Well, immediately, I would say Tasigur is going to run this every day of the week. One of the biggest challenges it has is trying to get rid of black mana and turn it into green or blue mana. And immediately you want this. But then also there's shenanigans with like Arbor Elf and Kyrian Ranger.
Oh, that's
to
cute.
just go infinite with a Gaia's Cradle that is now a forest, which you can return to your hand and untap the Arbor Elf and then, start going crazy with putting it back into play. Yeah, it's nice.
Does that mean like
this is
Kodama Sakashima might be on like Arbor Elf Green Ranger lines now? Like, you could make an argument that seems worth it in that deck now.
Well, Kodama Sagashima really doesn't usually go for infinite mana.
That's fair.
It wouldn't. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't run this. But usually once they combo off, it's all just triggers and they're not paying any mana at all.
That's fair.
So I don't really see that.
Hisp, if you're listening, I'm sorry.
Of note, if we ever wanted to see red Urborg, blue Urborg, or white Urborg, Aaron Forsyth has said not in modern, because unfortunately, Flashfires, Boil, and Valakut the Molten Pinnacle are all modern playable. And that is Valakut, which bolts everybody on a mountain entering play. Flashfires, which destroys all planes in play. And Boil, which destroys all islands in play.
So you
Which would be
mean
hilarious.
there's a chance?
Not in modern legal. So there's a chance that it might show up in a supplemental summer product, which would be Commander, Legacy, and Vintage only.
I think it would be such a mistake to do
That would be
an
where we're
island
gonna
version of this card. But that's like a whole other conversation.
I
Imagine
think of all of them, we are most likely
Yeah.
to see planes.
Yeah.
That would be the one that would be the safest
Dude,
one
if they
to
did
actually
an
print.
island one, High Tide becomes like the whole meta, I feel like, ends up becoming just like crop rotation into High Tide shenanigans. Like, just how do we turbo into that?
Yeah. No, that'd be stupid. Pongo, do you have any other thoughts here?
So I don't know if you mentioned it, but there's like interesting applications with this, potentially with Mystic Sanctuary. Like if you've got Quirion Ranger, for example, you can bounce the you can bounce the Mystic Sanctuary to your hand and replay it.
Oh,
So that's pretty sweet. It kind of goes against what you would expect, right? Because like Mystic Sanctuary cares about islands, but as long as you have 3 islands in play, it doesn't matter if they're tropical islands. You can still replay the Mystic Sanctuary or bounce it or flicker it, do other kind of fun things like that. Theoretically, that could be something that we see in Legacy. It could be something that we see in cEDH. Those are lines that, Tatsiova is currently,
I was just about to say that,
trying to take advantage of. Mystic Sanctuary is a card that, by my estimation, is a little bit underplayed in cEDH, but I kind of understand the reasons for it. But it's a very, very powerful card. No doubt about that. I think that this is just kind of like an incremental upgrade in cEDH for mono green decks. It's going to fix some of their colorless mana, maybe get them out of a bind every once in a while. And obviously has like some interesting like mini combos as you touched upon, Cam. Being able to use Arbor Elf to untap a Gaia's Cradle is pretty cool. But like, is it like a tremendous shakeup of the format? No, definitely not. And
No.
it's arguably like weaker than Urborg in terms of like how important green fixing is compared to how important black fixing is. But, conversely, the fact that you're not giving all your opponents black mana also makes it a little bit stronger. So I could see it theoretically seeing play just because fixing your opponents for green mana is rarely as catastrophic as fixing them for black.
and it's almost free.
And in mono green, yeah.
You're dropping, yeah. Yeah, in low color, it's basically free. In like 3 or more colors, it gets a little sketchy, and you're like, it'd be replacing like a fetch land or one of the like a tarnished citadel, but it's not in a great spot there. So
Well, that about wraps things up for us here today. Just a quick reminder that you can follow us on Twitter at SculptyBoys, or you can find a direct link in our link tree in the description below. I want to also give an extra thanks to all of our patrons who help keep the lights on. If you too would like to become a patron, you can head on over to patreon.com/themindsculptors or check out the link in the description. For the people who don't know where they can find the Lab Maniacs, where can they find the Lab Maniacs?
Well, labmaniacs.com/YouTube is a direct link to our YouTube channel. Labmaniacs.com/Discord will get you right into our Discord. If you would like to support us on Patreon, we do have some extra sections on our Discord that are patron exclusive, as well as several different tiers of additional perks we have for you there. So if you want to support us there, it's great. Otherwise, you can find me on Twitter at LabmanCam or at the Laboratory Maniacs. And yeah, that's the Lab Maniacs.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This was a great time.
Thank you for stopping by. And again, I know I said this at the top of the show, but like, you guys are who got me into the format. You were the guys who kind of unknowingly held my hand into this journey that is cEDH. And I will always be thankful to you, Cobblepot, Dan, and Siggy for all of the work you guys have done over the past few years. So, and it's a pleasure to get to work with you.
Yeah, that means quite a lot. That was like everything you just said was the entire reason to make the Lab Maniacs. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us. And from all of us here at the Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.